All right, this is Group 37 with Mitch, Seth, and Dante, and this is our REP. It's a 1/10 scale Traxxas slash 4x4 remote control truck. So on the outside, looks like a normal RC car, but this one is capable of doing over 60 miles an hour, and yeah, it can get pretty fast. So starting off at the front, you have a front bumper to protect from any kind of front impact. This is how the body's held up. They're like these adjustable posts. They can go either higher or lower depending on the make or style of the body there is. Front suspension, you have 2 shocks. It's independent front and rear suspension. You have steering linkage, suspension linkage, front drive axles because it is 4-wheel drive. And here you have steering linkage connected to the servo. Your input comes from the radio to the receiver. The receiver sends the signal to the speed control and the servo gets it from this small antenna here. Speed control, all the electronics are powered by the battery right here. This is a nickel-metal hydride battery. There's also LiPo batteries, which are lithium polymer or lithium-ion polymer. So the speed control gets the power from the receiver, sends its stuff to the brushless motor here, which is connected to the I guess transmission. There's 2 gears in here, drive shaft right here, which powers the front wheels, and inside this case right here and this case right here, there's 2 differentials that we'll get into that later. Rear suspension is really similar to the front suspension, except that it does not have steering linkage, camber linkage, drive axles, shocks, shock tower, same setup in the back with the post that adjustable. Rear bumper right here, it's got mud flaps on it. Those are aesthetic. And wheelie bars. If it had one of the LiPo batteries in it, those are the batteries that cause it to go really fast, and all the torque makes the body like lift up. So these protect the car from completely flipping over when you have all that power. So the car is held together put together with hex hardware. Pretty much the whole entire thing. There are a few Phillips heads for these adjustable body mounts. So the engineers at Traxxas were really smart when they designed this truck, coming off of their newer, older models. They made it so that you can take off the front and rear hubs of the car pretty easily with 4 bolts, well 5 in the front. So this just kind of snaps right off. You can see inside the differential there. So that's the rear. There's the gear assembly, the slipper clutch. You can see the pinion gear connected to the motor in there. And then you can just pull the drive shaft out. And then the front requires a bit more, just one more. So once that bolts off, you can pull apart the front assembly pretty easily, just like the rear. And then the car is then broken down into 3 separate parts. You have the chassis, the rear, and the front assemblies.
All right, so this is the front assembly for the truck. So here we can get a really good view on the front differential assembly. And so as the front tires spin, you can see that this spins, and this is what causes the truck to actually have 4-wheel drive. So the drivetrain would be attached like this, and as the drivetrain spins, so do the front tires. So the front tires end up spinning to the axles that are connected to the differential inside of here. They go down and into the wheel hubs. Try to get a good angle, like there. You see the wheel hubs right there, and they connect inside of this little rubber cover using ball bearings to the front tires that allow them to spin. You can see how they're spinning as the tires rotate. So the other things that are part of the wheel hub, you have your sway bars and your camber adjusters. What that does is it allows you to give customization as well as handling improvement to the car. So here on this top bar is how you adjust your camber. So you would move one screw from this hole to here to pull the tire inwards, making it more diagonal. What this would do is the tire would have more grip on the inside of it rather than the outside, because instead of being horizontal, you're angled inwards. And this does is gives you more snappy response when you're turning left and right, as well as gives you better cornering and handling at the cost of traction. So it's about finding that middle ground. And moving on from there, the bottom lower arm here, this is the steering bar. As you can see, this was the screw that was taken apart that attached to the front of the chassis to here. And as the motor turns from side to side, you can see as it turns to the right, so do the wheels. And when you turn to the left, the wheels do as well. And this is connected through 2 ball joints here to turn the left tire, and another ball joint here to turn the right tire. And moving 180 degrees to the front, here you can get a really good look at the front of the differential. Now this is encased because there is liquid inside of it to help lubricate it and to reduce friction and help four-wheel drive system. So here are what we call shock towers, and here we have our springs, and here is actually fluid that applies resistance to here, so when the car is under load, it compresses up and then releases back down. And then these can also be adjusted, and you can see the other holes here, move them over one. And what this does is it allows the car to be higher or lower to the center of gravity. The lower you are, better steering and everything you have, but at the cost of ground clearance. You can also adjust it here as well if you want. And so what this, I'm gonna get a better view here, is this brass rod goes inside of the shock tower, increasing the pressure of the fluid that is in here, as well as increasing the pressure on the springs. So you can see as the tire goes up, so do the springs, and this adds tension into the system. What was mentioned before is that these are independent, meaning that one tire can be fully compressed while the other is not. Here's an example of that. And this does is allows the car to be at different angles while still having all 4 tires touch the ground. And then once again, you can see the pins here that can adjust the height of the body when it sits on top of it. Alright, so we're going to take the tires off. So these tires are center locking, meaning that there is just the one bolt in the middle. So if you were to go look at your car, it would either have 4 or 5 lug nuts on it, and that's just ways of holding the tires onto the axles. So now that that's unscrewed, take the tire off. And so here you can get a better look at the front axle as that spins. So as I spin my front axle, you can see that's connected through the differential to the other tire. As well as you can see here that it's connected by another ball joint to here, and as it goes left and right, so does the tire. And actually, you can get a good idea of what it's like to adjust camber. So this is actually not in line with the front bumper, so the front bumper is straight right now, and this is actually angled inwards, which allows, which, like I said, handling and all of that stuff. So if this was shortened or moved in, there would be more angle. If it was pushed out, the angle would be in the opposite direction. Alright, so this is the rear assembly of the truck. So as you can see, this is the rear differential. So the drivetrain, once again, would go inside of here and spin, causing these tires to spin. And once again, it's very similar to the front, just with minor differences. The biggest difference and most notable one being that there is no steering assembly. So you can see here we just have our upper camber adjusting bar, but we do not have any lower steering angle bar. That is because most cars are just front steer, very few are rear steering cars. So you can see we still have our shock tower, we have our axles connected to our wheel hubs, we have our differential, and we have our rear bumper, as well as the wheels that help the car from too much torque and hitting the ground. So we'll take one of the tires off again to get a better look at the wheel assembly. Once again, the rear tires are center locking as well. There's no 5-lug or 4-lug tires on this truck. So you can see here, we just have our axle with our upper sway arm to adjust the camber. The biggest difference between here and here, as you can get a good angle, is that there is no steering knuckle in the front one, in my right hand, but there is no steering knuckle in the rear. The steering knuckle is only for the name steering. Once again, you can also adjust camber between these 5 holes here. That'll bring this further in or further out. We have our shock tower again. Same thing, the springs with the fluid inside, and the bar pushes up in the fluid, it increases pressure. We also have the same pins that hold the body up from the frame. And that's about it. They're very similar.
So looking at the tires of the vehicle, these wheel assembly and tire, these are beadlock wheels. So it's actually a three-piece wheel that pops apart. And we'll take this apart now. So now that all the screws are out, so what we can do is just pop off this ring, this silver ring in the front. You can see there's a whole bunch of holes behind here. This is the ring. It's really lightweight. It's made out of aluminum. You can put your fingers like this, pop out the first part of the wheel, and then these tires are pretty dirty. You can actually unwrap them while the sand coming off and pull out the third part of the wheel. So this wheel goes back together. Take your inside piece, kind of, put it like that, and then the bead of the tire gets locked in, that's why they're called bead locks, into this ring here, when this ring goes on top like that, and it holds the tire in place in the front and the rear, inside that little section. So looking closer at the tires, these are actually modeled off of a real-life tire, BF Goodrich. Inside you have a foam, kind of like cushion, like there's no air. This is, I think, a medium compound foam. They have softer and harder ones. This just allows your tire to flex like any normal tire would. It's on a much smaller scale, so there's not that big of an impact, but it's still there. Put that back over here. Looking at the main chassis of the vehicle, there's 5 main components. You have your gearing back here, your brushless motor on this model, the speed controller, the ESC, the receiver, and the steering servo. So we're gonna go into more in depth into each of those later. So you can just take off this right here, this little plastic part. When the rear and front is still on the vehicle, this just makes it easier to adjust the gearing, make sure it's in the right position. The main rule for this, if you can see in here, is that you're supposed to be able to slide a piece of paper in between the gears. A thin piece of paper, like notebook paper, anything really will do, printer paper. That's how to get them lined up perfectly. So once everything's apart, you can just slip this right out. This is the slipper clutch assembly, and this is your spur gear. Stock, in which this is a 54 tooth spur gear, and the slipper clutch assembly back here. This part up here is what attaches to the drive shaft. In here you have your pinion gear, which connects to the motor. This spins around. This is much smaller than the spur gear. I believe this is 13 tooth. And in here, if you can see, is a bearing. There are many bearings in many locations on the car, just to help it run smoothly. Anything that turns, you're supposed to do it nice and smooth. Your motor here, your ESC or speed control here. This is connected with 3 wires. And there's 2 bolts holding it in, one here, one here. This is how you take the motor out or adjust the gearing. Once you have that unscrew out, you can just slide the motor up and pop it out. Do a tie down here for the wires just so they don't go everywhere. And then once you have that out, the motor just pops right out. As you can see, pinion gear spins like that. There's the motor. You have the speed control down here. This is the battery tie down. It's just what holds the battery in place when you have the car moving. It didn't work before because I had it in the highest position. Okay. So once you have the 2 bolts that hold in the box on the bottom and the 2 on the top, you can lift it up and find that there's 2 connections in here. One goes to the front over here, that's the steering servo. This one back here goes to the speed control. So once those are out, you can just pop that out. There's your speed control. And then you can take this wire out, move this to the side, and it's still bolted in under here. This is your servo. So we can take that out now. So once those 4 screws on the bottom are out, you're able to just pop the steering servo out of this little hole there, and you have your steering servo. So in here is the receiver, which there's a wire that goes through the antenna here, and you have your radio right here. So looking at the materials of what the truck is made out of, it's mainly pretty hard, durable plastic. 2 things on the chassis that are more flexible than the rest of the truck are these 2 bash bars on the side. Much like the bumpers at the front and rear of the vehicle, these provide protection against side impact. And there's actually Velcro along the sides that I myself put there just to keep the body attached and not from it flapping along when you're driving it. So the chassis is made of, and most of the truck's made of this durable plastic. It's not really flexible, and mainly because it's cheap, it's easy to replace. They sell upgraded parts with aluminum, I think even carbon fiber. There's some aftermarket companies, but that can get pretty expensive. This is just easy to make, mold, and produce in pretty high volume. Looking at the front of the vehicle, there's a few more different materials we have here. This shock tower here, it's hard to see because it's a very similar color. This piece right here that the shocks are connected to, that is made out of aluminum. So what that is it's just a lot stronger than when the plastic. If I had them here with me, the plastic shock towers would flex when you compressed the tire up. Not that much, but so slightly that it could make a difference. These aluminum towers don't flex at all. It's much stronger than the plastic ever was. Another material we have here is these drive shafts are made of steel compared to the plastic. These are aftermarket along with the shocks and the shock towers. There's quite a few aftermarket parts on this. These wheel hubs that the wheels lock into are made of aluminum, same as the shock towers. They're just much more durable. They wear out less and they'll last a lot longer. So let's pull off one of these drive shafts. You're gonna pop this off with a flathead screwdriver. And because this bolt could simply, this little screw right here, could, it's called a grub screw, could not hold this in place with this axle turning, there's a notch in the back of the hex hub right here which fits right into this little pin that slides in the axle. Not only does this prevent the axle from popping out of that part of the rear wheel hub, it allows the wheel hub to lock right into the axle and prevent it from spinning. So once you take that off, pop off the pin. You can simply slide the axle right out, and a bearing actually came with it. Just slide the bearing right off. So what most of the bearings are supposed to look like. This bright blue rubber seal. You can see it on both sides. It's nice and clean, not a lot of dirt got in there. Well, there's a lot of dirt, but it happened to clean off pretty easy. So looking at the axle, this is made of steel. These are a lot stronger than the ones that came on the truck that were just plastic. With the LiPo batteries, the lithium-ion polymer batteries in the truck, there's so much more power and torque generated to the wheels, especially the rear, that the plastic axles just twist so much they just snap and break off, and then you'll drive away with only one wheel spinning. Definitely not optimum condition. When suspension is traveling up and down, see here on the rear assembly, you can see that the axle is actually stretched out more when the wheel is all the way extended. Even though it's ever so small, when it's straight like this, the axle is straight on, you can see, it's actually shorter than when it's extended all the way out. Same when it's up. So with looking at the axle that we took off, it's actually extendable to a small amount that allows it to travel with the suspension. Taking a look at the chassis again, this model is completely waterproof or water resistant. So what you have in here is the casing. This receiver itself is not waterproof, so what they've done is there's a blue seal around the edge of this case. When you clamp it down, it makes it so this seal with this box is completely waterproof. Then when you flip that over, screw it in. That seal's waterproof, and then they have a piece of foam right here and along the actual case right here, so that when you screw this piece down and it clamps on, that makes it so this receiver box is virtually water resistant, and unless you submerge it in some pretty deep water, you should be pretty safe.
Alright, so now we're going to explain how a differential works. So I have a diagram here. And so there are multiple types of differentials. The one that's in here, and for the purposes of this project, we will be talking purely about a clutch limited slip differential, also known as just an LSD. So the point of a differential is when your car goes around a turn, it turns in a circle, right? So you have your one tire here and one tire here. If they're both going around the turn, one tire will have a much larger distance to travel than the inside one. So they cannot spin at the same rate. So differential is in charge of doing this. So what happens is here, it's not the best drawn, but this little drive line here is what goes into here and turns the wheels. So as this turns, the wheels turn. And this comes in and turns this larger wheel here, which is connected to here, and it turns the other gears inside of here that are all toothed and connected together, kind of like that. And so as these spin, it sends power to both the left and the right side. As you can see here, I turn my tires, and they both end up turning. However, the great part about an LSD is that I can spin each tire independently from one another. So I can spin that tire without it moving, or I can spin the other tire without it moving, or I can spin one a lot slower than I can spin another. So I can slowly spin that one, and I can spin this one a lot faster, like that. So the way that this works is to do with these clutch pads here on either side. So this little W shape is what's called, it's a preloaded spring that applies applies outward force in either direction to engage these clutches. The clutches are essentially just gears that are pushed together and held there under the force of the preloaded spring. So when the tire, for example, if we were driving along and we hit a puddle, this tire is going to be spinning a lot faster than this tire due to the lack of traction. And now, since there's less traction, there is going to be less force on this side. With less force, it causes these clutch pads to disengage, and this to engage more, because the forces always need to be equal. So if you have less here, you're going to have more here, and will spend power to this wheel and giving you more traction. So this helps when you're going around a corner, because the tire that is spinning on the inside is spinning less than the tire on the outside, so it doesn't need as much power to continue moving as the tire on the outside does. And so that these gears here help to have them spin independently from one another and can spin at 2 different velocities. So a good example of this is that when I have here, and I can spin this in a circle because, I'll get the stuff out of the way, because the clutch will disengage from one side as I spin it around. Thank you. As I spin it around on this side. So as I spin to this side, this tire is staying still while it goes around the outside. So the clutch on this side is disengaged while the clutch on this side is now engaged. If I was to do the same thing on the other side, the clutch on this side is now disengaged while the clutch on the other side is engaged, causing the tire to be able to spin correctly. And you can see here that the tire on the outside is spinning significantly faster than the tire on the inside.
So, looking at the slipper clutch here, what a slipper clutch does is it essentially allows this gear here, when the truck is decelerating or slowing down, to slip, so that when the wheels want to move faster than the engine is allowing it, this will partially disengage and slip. You can't really do it right now as I'm not applying that much force. It'll slip to allow the wheels and the engine to move at a more compatible rate than what they want to. So looking at the gear ratios, this on an NIMH battery, nickel metal hydride, and a LiPo lithium polymer battery. Spur gear for this car, which is this bigger one right here, is mainly 54 tooth. So that is the big gear. There are 54 tiny little teeth along the edge of it. And so that's the spur gear. Looking at the pinion gear, which is found on the motor, this is a much smaller gear. And this one on the truck right now, and what comes stock, has 13 tiny little teeth on it. So you have, that's the spur, this is the pinion gear. So, focusing mainly on these batteries for now, which are the less powerful but easier to take care of, and less hassle batteries. You're starting off with a 54 tooth spur gear, a 13 tooth pinion gear. That'll get you about 35 miles an hour. If you bump the pinion gear, so with these two on this battery, you're looking at about 35 miles an hour. And that is with one of these batteries right here. It's an 8.4 volts, 5,000 mA, H battery. You're looking at about 35 miles an hour. If you were to upgrade this pinion gear to have 18 teeth, while in use with this 54 tooth spur gear, you'll look at about 40 miles per hour. Now, moving on to these batteries over here, the LiPo batteries, with this stock gear ratio, and on one of these batteries, you're looking at probably 45 miles an hour. That's so about a 10 mile an hour increase with the stock gear ratios. If you were to run a 19 tooth pinion on a LiPo battery, let's put that down here, with this 54 tooth spur gear, you'll get 60 miles per hour out of the truck. So while it's less complicated than a real full-size car, and it's not Ferrari or anything, there's still lots to play around with gear ratios here, your power source, and how much you can really get out of the car. So looking at the brushless motor, before looking at it, there was this plate on, which allows it to slide into place and lock in. After unscrewing that piece, which these screws normally get stripped, luckily they came off quite easily this time. There's a little black cap on the top. Just gonna pop that off. There's a little bit of dust in here. Just wipe that off. There are 4 screws on the outside edge. Once those 4 screws are off, you're just gonna take a flathead screwdriver and try to wiggle off this other black cap that's on here. Pop that off. It might shoot out from what I remember. There we go. See, you have a bearing in here, ball bearing that spins around with this right there on that cap. Inside the motor, there are a bunch of copper wires along the outside edge. There's quite a bit of dust in here, which is not very good. You have a brass little bushing here. And when you push along this outside rod here, this is what the pinion gear was attached to. This bolt right here, this little grub screw, was not on too tight. So once you push this out, it might take a little effort. Take off that little bearing there. Push down the table. Pop this out. You have your magnet. You can see inside the motor there, there's a bunch of wire. And at the very end, this hole is on the bottom, there's another ball bearing for the other side of this. And now we're going to explain how this brushless motor works.
Alright, now here we have a simple diagram how the brushless motor works. Now these outside magnets are the electromagnets, and this inside magnet is just a regular magnet. And this is what spins when these magnets are activated. So when B is activated, the magnet spins so the poles are then linked up with B, and then C is activated, linking the poles up with that, and finally A is activated, syncing the poles up with that, and the cycle continues again on, and that is what makes the car drive.
So The way that these magnets get turned on is through the controller. So you can see we have our white, blue, and yellow, and our white, blue, and yellow correspond to the controller when these are plugged in. So the wire comes in through the side here, and you can see how this, the wires go down through the copper cables, and these copper cables are connected at the very top to each of the individual magnets. And so once the individual magnets get a signal, whichever magnet and its corresponding opposite gets charged, which causes, like we said before, this to spin. And so this continuously does this for thousands and thousands and thousands of RPMs per minute, which causes the actual motor on the inside to spin, which connects to the gear and turns the tires.
So here we have the steering servo for the car. This is metal gears. It's upgraded a little bit more over the stock, which has plastic gears. Again, it's waterproof. So we take it apart with 4 screws in the back here. So once we take the last screw out, we'll be able to get our flathead screwdriver. Oop. Just be careful because there's... So here we have all the electronics of how it works. There's a small ring around here because, again, it is waterproof. I believe we can pop this up. Nope. So that stays there. You're just going to pull this off. So in there you have all the electronics that make the gears serve. It gets its signal from the receiver. And here you have your metal gears, which turn. And this gear right here is which gets the signal from the receiver. Turns this gear, which turns this gear, which turns the little arm on the outside of the servo, which turns the steering linkage. And then again, we have another ball bearing to make sure everything's running nice and smooth. And all your electrics in there. So looking at how we drive the car, it's similar to many radio controlled cars. You have your throttle in reverse right here. Turns on right there. These little knobs right here. This is a multi-function dial, so you can tune multiple things if you have an app. This is throttle adjustment, so you can have 70-30 or 50-50. And then this knob right here is to fine-tune your steering. Sometimes it'll knock around, get a little loose. This is just to make sure your wheels are aligned perfectly straight up. And this will just finally adjust the servo gears. So how this works is it's a 2.4 gigahertz. It'll send radio frequencies to this guy over here in the receiver over here through the antenna here. It'll go down here through that wire into that little box. When the speed control and the servo are connected to the proper channels in here, there's a few of them in here, they'll get the signals from either turning here or throttle here to either make the servo turn left or right and make the throttle or the motor spin either forwards or reverse to make the car go forwards or reverse. All right, now that we've taken everything apart, showing you how stuff works, how it's put together, we're gonna put it all back together and hope it runs right. So here we go. And we're all set. Okay, so one of the weak points designed on this RC truck here is actually pretty much anything plastic. While it's still durable, if you hit something hard enough, this truck can reach speeds of up to 60 miles an hour with the right gearing and battery. Stuff is gonna break. So these bumpers you can probably get one for $5-10 front and rear. It is an expensive hobby, but it's made so it's still somewhat affordable. One of the nicest weak spots on this car is actually the spur gear. That's part of the slipper clutch assembly, the bigger plastic 54 tooth spur gear. Those wear out quite a bit. I actually have a few extra ones. This is one of the new ones lying around. They wear out quite often, so buying one of those for probably $2-3 is nicer than having to replace a metal gear that will either burn out the differentials or the motor. This gear is designed, it was designed as a weak point, so you only have to spend $2 every time you go through your gears instead of 15 or even hundreds for a new motor. So that's something the engineers, when they were making this truck, that they actually did pretty nice. And just same goes for, I've broken numerous steering knuckles, wheel hubs inside here, even the plastic drive shafts I've broken a few. So upgrading to steel was definitely a better option. There's some points that are worth upgrading to either steel or aluminum, where it makes sense to pay that money, as those parts don't break as often compared to these gears like this and other plastic stuff that gets impacted quite often. So there's quite a few things on this truck that could be improved. Powertrain wise, I'd say it's pretty good, except for maybe the axles up here that drive the wheels. Those break pretty often once you really start upgrading for better batteries. But looking at other things to improve, a lot of stuff on this truck I've upgraded so that it's aftermarket. These shock guards on the front here, they protect the bottom of the shock. So if you were to hit a rock in this general area, your whole shock is unprotected. And speaking of the shocks, those are also aftermarket too. As you can see, they're adjustable up here. That allows for overall adjustability, softness. They have dual spring rates, so they can compress. As you can see, the top spring compresses fully before the bottom spring does, so the bottom spring is much more stiffer than the top spring is. And overall, they're just a lot better quality shocks. They're made out of aluminum instead of plastic that comes stock. There's definitely a lot of improvements to be made on the base car. Like I mentioned before, these shock towers came plastic, and those definitely need to be upgraded. That's something they could do, the Traxxas could do from factory, because there's virtually no flex visible at all when you're moving the suspension compared to what it was before. You would see the body mounts shake, and definitely makes the car a lot more stable to drive. Same with the drive shafts. Those are now steel as opposed to the plastic. The plastic ones just wore out so fast. That's definitely something Traxxas could improve on from the factory. Other than that, I've mentioned that this is a lower center of gravity chassis, so all of this heavy stuff, the battery, the motor, the speed control, the receiver, the servo, sits a lot lower on this model compared to the higher center of gravity base model that I would say sits about an inch higher. So there's definitely a lot less body roll with this chassis compared to the higher one, which definitely makes the car handle a lot better when taking turns. And you can definitely carry a lot more speed without it flipping over. It's definitely a lot more fun to drive, as you don't have to drive it all the way out there, drive it back, and then have it flip over, have to go run and pick it up. It's definitely, there are a lot more improvements that I have done that they could improve on from factory. Another thing is with the higher power batteries, you get so much torque going to the rear wheels that if you've ever seen dragsters, the front wheels will pick up and the car will do a wheelie. These wheelie bars I added when I was running those higher powered batteries, just so the whole car wouldn't flip over on itself onto the roof. And it's definitely something they could have added from factory. However, they don't know what kind of batteries you're going to use. There's definitely a lot of improvements that the car could make, but overall I'd say it's pretty nice. So another area of improvement where Traxxas could have looked at is there is a stainless steel screw conversion on this truck. So most of the screws and hardware is stainless steel. It's been switched over so that not only do the screws they're less likely to strip when you're constantly taking them off, putting them back on, but they won't rust. Good example of this is right over here on the front skid plate. You can see the 3 over here, or even 5, are stainless steel compared to these 4 over here that seem to kind of rust, and I think maybe even a few of these are stripped out. Once that happens, you're just gonna have to, like, what I always do is take a Dremel to it, use a flathead screwdriver to take it out, and then that's about it. It's definitely one of the areas Traxxas could improve, and definitely a pretty solid upgrade. So, looking at batteries for the cars, there's 2 options. You have NiMH, which are nickel metal hydride, and then you have lipo batteries, or lithium ion polymer batteries. So I have a nickel metal hydride battery right here. It has 8.4 volts and 5,000 milliamps. So most of the times when you're looking at the voltage of the battery, it's, I guess, in relation to a real car, how much horsepower does it have? This battery has 8.4 volts, so it's got enough power. It can make the truck get up pretty quick. So technically it's how much power does it have. When you look at mAh, or milliamps per hour, looking at a regular car, it's more of a comparison to, I guess, how much gas does it have? How long can it run? This has 5,000 mAh, but it's a pretty old battery, so it's probably lost a few run times. So this is looking about like 20 minutes, more like, so mAh is looking at runtime. And this is volts. This is milliamps per hour. So some of the pros of nickel metal hydride batteries is they're safe, relatively safe. They're reliable. They last for a long time. But they're not as powerful. As lipo batteries. And they're all often quite bulky. This battery right here is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a 7-cell battery. Whereas lipo batteries, a lipo battery of this size is probably a 3S lipo. So they can fit a lot more to this size with a lipo. So looking at lipo batteries, they are they can be dangerous. If they're not cared for properly. Like I said, there's lots of care required. You can't have them overcharged, you can't have them undercharged, and you actually need to charge them in a fireproof either bag or case, like an ammo box, just in case they do overheat, something goes wrong, that your house doesn't burn down. But putting all of this aside, they're a lot more fun. This is what gets the car going to speeds of 60 plus miles per hour with the right gearing, and ultimately gets the car to do wheelies off the ground. They're pretty fun. And right here, we have this battery charging right now. It's almost done. This is actually what a typical charger would look like. You just plug it in, set it to nickel metal high drive. It's not charged, pretty straightforward. This charger actually takes 2 batteries. It can take 2 at a time. Right now, there's only the one. And yeah, that's pretty much the basics for batteries on these things. Okay, so looking at the history of, I guess, Traxxas in general, they started in 1987 when they released their electric trucks and little stadium buggies, so just like little doo-doo-doo with the little wing there. So those were electric. A few years later, they released a remote control boat, like a little speedboat, in 1989. And then a few years later, 10 years later, in 1999, they actually released their first full-sized monster truck, which was powered by gas. It's called nitro fuel. It's like a special blend for the motors that they had, so they were gasoline powered. And as years go on, there's a truck really similar to this model called the Slayer that I believe is discontinued. That was that ran on that nitro fuel. That is, I believe, discontinued just because electric is the move now. It's so much more efficient than having to tune the engines, keep buying gas for them. Whereas with electric, you can buy a battery, recharge a whole bunch of times, and have fun. Keep having fun with it. Much like what's happening with ICE and combustion engines right now, and electric, it's making just leaps towards the future with electric. So yeah, it's pretty cool that they're like moving on with electric. I think it's definitely pretty cool what they're doing. And it's cool that like it's already happened with these little trucks and it's happening with the bigger stuff now. So yeah, that's just a little bit of the history of these trucks. Start off electric, not that fast. Gasoline was pretty cool. They make a little like wah noise. It's pretty cool. My dad actually had one of these trucks. I remember him always having. It was pretty cool. This fuel, oops, is actually nitro methane, and the stuff that they put in that, you would fill it up with as a like a really light pale blue color, and the molecular formula for this is actually CH3NO2.